he was on the verge of losing his life. For him and all his colleagues, a tribute of recognition for the effort and dedication of every day.
May 1st of 2015, the non-commissioned officer Ivan Morales was shot down from the helicopter he was traveling in during an operation called Operation Jalisco, whose goal was to capture a not-so-well-known Nemesio Seguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho. The former officer survived the shooting down of the army helicopter after an attack by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel when they were trying to arrest its leader. But it all started when the military helicopter he was traveling in took off from Mexico City to the Colima airport, from where he would travel the next day to participate in a secret operation. However, between 5 and 6 hours, the unit was attacked with gunfire. 16 members of the army, Ivan Morales and a colleague from the then Federal Police were traveling in the helicopter. By that time, it was still dark and they began to be pursued by vehicles bursting with weapons. Before they could realize what was happening, their enemies began to shoot. At no time did they have time to defend themselves when there was a very strong impact that started to set the helicopter on fire and they began to plummet. Finally, there was a strong explosion that seemed to signal the end of their lives. However, against all odds, Ivan Morales survived the helicopter crash and managed to get out of the unit amidst the flames. Although he did suffer severe burns that would mark his skin forever, reminding him of that horrific day. Thus, the federal police officer became a hero and one of the survivors of one of the most serious attacks perpetrated by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel in the last decade. His face, marked by burns, became a symbol for the security forces and the fight against drug trafficking. Ivan Morales had narrowly escaped death at the hands of drug traffickers who never show mercy or forgiveness to their victims. And so, 10 years later, on the anniversary of the attack, fate would come to collect its outstanding debt. But what happened to Ivan Morales? Well, that's what I'm going to tell you about today, but let's start with the story. May 1st of 2015, the former policeman left the port of Manzanillo in Colima, but nobody told him that he was going to be part of an elite detachment sent to stop El Mencho, a long-time dangerous character they had been monitoring. His bosses feared that there would be leaks ahead of time and that the criminals would be prepared for the ambush, so they kept the true objective of the mission secret until the last moment.
No one knew where he was going or to what no one. He told them they were going to carry out an arrest warrant against a person who at that time was not making headlines in the national media, a certain Nemesio Seguera Cervantes.
So he and his companions boarded a Mexican army helicopter and traveled to Jalisco, at the height of Villa Purification, where one of Mencho's luxurious barrios is located.
The non-commissioned officer was among the police tasked with capturing Nemesio Seguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho, head of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel.
The agents flew over it with 4 military and federal police helicopters. In one of them was Ivan, a woman, also a federal police officer, and 16 military personnel. The second helicopter was planned to be used to transport Osegueras in case of arrest. At that moment, they identified the convoy in which the leader of the 4 letters cartel was traveling. Their plan was to reduce them and stop the leader, but before they could neutralize him and successfully accomplish their mission, it was not going to be an easy task. The hitmen opened fire with heavy artillery against them. Morales only remembers the impacts from the attack and how the sounds of the bullets were heard, how they hit the sheet metal, and how the .50 caliber bullets went through the helicopter's helmet as if it were paper. One of the 4 helicopters was hit by a Russian rocket launcher and fell in a forced landing that ended the lives of 9 agents.
On one hand, it's the first time we see how a cartel uses .50 caliber weapons to shoot at a federal forces aircraft.
Meanwhile, chaos in the air. Mencho's men fired at them with a grenade launcher. One of the projectiles crashed into the rotor and Morales' helicopter began to fall. Desperate, the ex-policeman held onto whatever he could and prayed to come out alive. And despite the attack, the pilot luckily, miraculously managed to maneuver the helicopter to a forced landing. They were lucky because if they had fallen in free fall, they would have exploded.
The helicopter, thanks to the pilot from back then in 2015, didn't crash, but fortunately, he was able to maneuver.
At that moment, he felt the impact and Morales thought he would lose his life there in the hands of his enemies. But he survived the fall and could still stand. However, the only way out of the helicopter was engulfed in flames. Morales had no escape, but he remembered that his wife was pregnant with their first child. With that mindset, he mustered the strength to get out. His greatest wish was to meet his child, even if just once, before he died.
Hours earlier, news from his partner that he was gonna be a dad.
So he threw himself into the fire to escape, but his body quickly caught on fire. He took off his clothes and military gear, including his bulletproof vest, as best he could. The part of his chest and his vital organs were saved from the worst burns. But eventually he had to take it off because it had started to catch fire. Morales rolled on the ground to extinguish the flames engulfing his body. Around him, he could still hear the screams of the hitmen and the bullets finishing off his comrades. Driven by adrenaline and the will to live, he fled the scene. He jumped a fence and took refuge behind a rock while feeling unbearable pain all over his body.
He chambered a round in his 9mm pistol, the only defense he had left, and with his skin melting as he ran, he fled from that area and hid behind a rock.
Morales endured the injuries for an agonizing time until later the army burst into the place and found him with his life hanging by a thread and with 70% of his body burned.
That day, half of the personnel traveling in the helicopter died, including his partner from the federal police.
This attack became one of the great embarrassments of the Peña Nieto government. Already highly questioned after the disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students a year earlier, and a couple of months later, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman escaped from the maximum security prison of the Highlands through a tunnel of 1.5 kilometers, once again demonstrating the state's inability to deal with organized crime. The agent, then returning to where we were, was found alive hours after the incident, far from the crash site, after which he was taken to a hospital in Guadalajara in Jalisco. He was conscious the whole time and they asked him not to fall asleep. When he finally fell unconscious, he woke up again after a month. To Ivan Morales, the fire left him with visible and deep scars, especially on his face, arms, and part of his torso, where reconstructive surgeries could only do part of the work. And after a series of 15 reconstructive surgeries at the Central Military Hospital in Mexico City, Morales was able to partially recover. His face was severely affected, the visible injuries were deep, but in the hospital they nicknamed him a hero. Upon waking, one of his first words were, "I'm going to be a dad, I don't want to give up like this." Despite the physical pain and the gaze of others, which often crosses with prejudice, Morales decided to move forward. For his family and his son, who was born a month after he was discharged from the hospital in October of the year 2015. Nothing prevented him from resuming his life, which this time remained in the shadows. He was only seen when, in the same year, 2015, he was publicly recognized by then President Peña Nieto for his courage and resilience. The elite of Mexican politics in a row, along with the then president, applauded among solemn gestures. Meanwhile, the ex-policeman, in his dress uniform and face, sadly quite damaged by fire, advanced towards them with his head held high.
There they recognized him. He waves with his right hand. His left hand is practically immobile.
Upon arriving before Peña Nieto, Morales stopped, shook the leader's hand, and received a commemoration from him. That day in December of the year 2015, he was honored with honors. During the ceremony, the event called Federal Police Merit and Recognition 2015, held at the National Auditorium, tribute was paid to the former agent for his bravery and service in the fight against organized crime. Thus, the government highlighted Morales and other colleagues who died in the accident for their work in different task spaces and assigned mission. The then President Peña Nieto, as I tell you, also highlighted the case of Ivan, describing him as someone who put his life at risk and who managed to survive an operation carried out and in which he unfortunately suffered burns and was injured. All the staff stood up and applauded, an ovation that was only for him and his bravery. That gesture was very emotional for Morales and showed that despite everything and all the circumstances, he was still standing there. Thus, he deserved the honors that the state gives to its most chosen heroes. There he holds
the diploma and the medal, and the applause extends. There are the officials of then. Manuel La Cámara is handling goes to a general shot of a completely full national auditorium and offering him applause.
That day, Mexico saw its face, the open wound of the failed fight against organized crime. But Morales wanted them to see his face, not for them to feel sorry for him. On the contrary, he wanted to show that there were scars that hurt, but that one could move forward despite everything. One of the things that helped him a lot psychologically was the unconditional support of his wife. And instead of thinking about himself and his internal and external pain, he thought more about his son and the desire to see him grow. After that traumatic event, Morales left the police force, which was disbanded years later by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. But time passed and he was still haunted by nightmares and post-traumatic stress. However, he found comfort in his son and his partner. Although he left the police, he continued fighting organized crime, which nearly killed him and left him scarred physically and emotionally. In September 2024, he testified as a witness in the trial against El Mencho's son, Rubén Oseguera González, alias El Menchito. Morales was part of the American prosecutor's collaborators who testified against him, who was soon found guilty of 2 charges related to drug trafficking. And it was on September 16th of the year 2024 when Morales, who had his face disfigured by the flames that enveloped him that day, was called to the stand in the Federal Court of Washington.
His story is part of the trial against Rubén Oseguera González, alias El Menchito, for drug trafficking and weapons possession.
In his testimony, he recalled that on April 1st, 2015, the operation began, involving 16 soldiers and 2 federal police officers. Among them, he later found out they were looking to arrest Nemesio Seguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho, the undisputed leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. His statement then detailed the logistics of the 2015 operation, the conditions of the attack, and the armed capabilities of the cartel. Morales and several witnesses claimed that Rubén Oseguera González, alias El Menchito, the cartel's second-in-command, ordered the helicopter to be shot down to stop his father's arrest.
El Menchito, only 25 years old at the time, ordered this attack.
That completely breaks what
We knew about the performance of organized crime.
Morales' testimony allowed a jury to find Oseguera González guilty of trafficking white gold and other substances, and also of having used firearms and destructive devices for his criminal businesses. Finally, on March 7, 2025, El Menchito was sentenced to life in prison and recently admitted to the high-security penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. Morales' testimony would be key in achieving the life sentence imposed on the defendant. Finally, in some way, the former agent had achieved the justice that had been pending for almost 10 years. But what he didn't know was that the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the one that hadn't managed to get rid of Morales, still remembered its outstanding debt and was about to collect it. However, things started to heat up months before the events. A week before the sentence, Menchito's uncle, Antonio Teguera, alias Tony Montana, had been handed over by Mexican authorities to the United States in an operation requested by President Trump. Currently, El Mencho has no blood heirs for his powerful criminal clan, and there are American pressures on Claudia Sheinbaum's government to effectively combat the drug trade, it is said. They are making the big bosses nervous, who these days are reacting with outbreaks of fire and violence. Mexico. Just a few weeks ago, Mencho's men sowed terror in 3 of the states over which they extend their power, which are Jalisco, Michoacán, and Guanajuato. There were 4 hours of narco blockades and fires on the roads of 30 municipalities, which tormented the population, among gunshots and in which 2 police officers lost their lives. The drug lord was measuring his power against the authority at a time of many losses in his organization, the reason that led to the discovery in the early days of March of a recruitment camp. We already know what happens there. By the way, they just caught the mayor of Teochitlan, but that's another story.
Yesterday, after almost 10 years of living in fear of survival, hiding from organized crime, he was murdered in Temisco, Morelos.
Meanwhile, amidst chaos and with power hanging by a thread, the 4-letter cartel swore to finally fulfill its failed objective from 10 years ago, to get rid of Ivan Morales, who was beginning to bother them and who had sent one of the new cartel leaders to jail.
Ivan Morales Corrales, a former non-commissioned officer of the now-defunct federal police, was the sole survivor of an assault by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel on the helicopter he was aboard.
As if time had not passed, the same landscape was experienced this year. But on this occasion, the criminals have managed to exact their revenge against the police officer in the Morelense development of Las Brisas. And it all happened on May 30th, 2025, exactly a decade after the attack. Morales Corrales was driving through a subdivision in the municipality of Temixco in the state of Morelos. He didn't have security, not even an armored truck. He could never have imagined what was about to happen on the anniversary of the attack, which almost cost him his life. Perhaps even naive on his part, if you've just been part of putting the son of the most powerful drug lord in Mexico in jail.
A white sport utility vehicle blocked their way. Armed men got out of it and started shooting at them.
Some men intercepted their black pickup with another car, and several men on motorcycles. Without a word, they fired a hail of bullets, more than 50, at Morales and his partner. The attackers abandoned the vehicle at the scene, presumably leaving the weapons used in the attack.
Gunmen ran towards the main avenue, where their accomplices were waiting for them on motorcycles.
Minutes later, paramedics arrived, who could do nothing as the victims had lost their lives due to multiple gunshot wounds.
They intercepted him, and as if nothing as happens in this country, they executed him.
In this way, Ivan Morales Corrales and his wife were brutally killed, and a profound message was left with their lives. Not even the heroes of the homeland, honored by the president. Those who have risked their lives in the war against drugs and have survived to tell the tale are safe from these criminal groups. According to local journalistic reports, the attackers carried out the attack with precision, which suggests prior planning before the events took place. The scene was also secured by state and municipal agents, while forensic experts carried out the removal of the bodies.
But in the end, he was a survivor of one of the attacks. I would say Miriam more violent.
The end of Ivan Morales Corrales has generated, as you can imagine, great outrage among members of the Public Security Guild, especially among former federal colleagues. It is not surprising that his end in this world occurred in a context of increasing violence. In the southwest region of Morelos, where cells of the Jalisco Cartel, New Generation, and Los Rojos operate, human rights organizations identify the area as a high-risk place for security agents and collaborating witnesses. And here then the question is, what was this member or former member of the army doing there?
Did he really not have protection? He testified against the son of the leader of the most extensive, most deeply rooted cartel in Mexico.
In 2023, just to give you an idea, Morelos recorded over 900 intentional homicides, several of which involved executions of former officials or law enforcement officers. Unfortunately, the case of Ivan Morales Corrales was added to a long list of key witnesses who have been killed or disappeared after collaborating with foreign agencies for the arrest of criminals like the son of the most powerful drug lord in Mexico or one of the most powerful.
That these types of characters require special security, they don't realize that these criminals do whatever they want.
But ultimately, that his murder occurred exactly 10 years after the attack in Jalisco has led to speculations about a possible planned revenge. And even in a mocking way, some of his former colleagues considered that his end was not an isolated event but a message directed at the Justice Department and its inefficiency. On social media, elements of police and military corporations mourned his death and demanded results from the government. Morales' family has not issued a public statement, but close associates reported that they will demand a thorough investigation with federal accompaniment. The body of the former officer was delivered on the morning of May 1st at the Forensic Medical Service of Cuernavaca for his subsequent burial, surrounded by his loved ones and those who saw him administer justice.
Perhaps he had a pension, perhaps he had something to develop a business. I don't know what he was into, but he didn't have an armored truck and he didn't have protection. 7 months after giving his testimony in the United States,
Morales' end reignited the debate over the protection of witnesses and collaborators in transnational investigations. So far, neither the Public Security Secretariat nor the State Army have made a statement about the case. The Morelos prosecutor's office has launched an investigation into this crime, and revenge is a possible motive being considered. Up to this point, the investigations are still ongoing, and responsibilities or accusations of the people who may have taken this officer's life have not yet been determined. So far, as I tell you, no one has claimed the murder of the agent. But the date exactly 10 years after the attempt to capture the leader of the four letters cartel leaves few in doubt. Whose hand is it that hides behind the attack? Ivan's trajectory, marked by his bravery and collaboration with foreign agencies, could have made him an easy target for organized crime. But it seems the authorities failed to see the hidden danger, or perhaps they simply didn't care, as is often true.
Security does not exist where we simply and plainly depend on what the criminal groups do.
The Mexican state could not protect Corrales in either of the two May attacks that marked his life and death. Various analysts have denounced that the territorial control of this cartel has grown with the help of complicity in state and municipal spheres, which then makes us think that his death could have happened in collaboration with his own colleagues, which is not so far-fetched.
They are the ones who command, they are the ones who have control.
Civil bodies demand that the National Human Rights Commission document the case and incorporate it into their reports on institutional violence. The crime also pressured the Attorney General's office to bring the case, given its possible federal dimension. And also in a statement, the organization Common Cause expressed its outrage at the crime and demanded real protection for those who confront organized crime. And so the death of Morales has highlighted the problem that has been ongoing for years and that no one seems to be seeking a solution for. The disappearance and death of witnesses and former officials key to arresting drug leaders has become a constant, which undermines the fight against drug trafficking and international justice processes.
Because it's a person who survived an attack from a criminal group and now he's dead, he's been murdered along with another person.
For many, Morales symbolized courage and resistance against the power of the drug cartels, which gives an even more tragic dimension to his end. Especially because there was a government that knew how to award him a Medal of Honor for his bravery, but did not know how to protect him, which is most important, from evil, which he ended up fulfilling what they didn't achieve that 1st of May of 2015. It's a bitter end that leaves a deep discomfort and outrage, and it seems that the only way out is to flee the country. But it's also unfair that someone has to make such a tough decision. Justice is supposed to protect those who dare to speak up, especially when their testimony should help curb drug trafficking. The one that has so tarnished his reputation and exposed his ineffectiveness in the pursuit of justice. For more videos about the searching mothers, check out Pepe Misterio's channel with new uploads on Mondays and Wednesdays. You can find several of these ladies who are dedicated to searching for their children. And if you want to see more videos of drug traffickers, you can also watch them on this channel. There was one last Friday and the Friday before that as well.